Li Wei's vigilance was unceasing, but she never allowed her focus on Julian's recovery to waver. Her treatments continued with a newfound urgency. She used the untainted herbs, a delicate blend of ancient remedies, to slowly but surely cleanse Julian's system and encourage his circulation to improve. The air in the room, once thick with the sterile scent of modern medicine, was now fragrant with the subtle, earthy perfume of her herbal concoctions. Julian's recovery wasn't just physical, it was a reawakening of his formidable intellect. He was a man who had built an empire on his ability to see through deception. And now, with his faculties restored, he began to piece together the unspoken truths Li Wei had been shielding him from. He saw the subtle tension in his grandmother's face whenever Marcus's name was mentioned. He noticed the quiet, watchful presence of Mr. Wu. And most of all, he saw the deep concern in Li Wei's eyes whenever she spoke of his past. Old Mrs. Sterling, the matriarch whose will was as unyielding as the bedrock of the city itself, sat vigil by his side. Her face, etched with lines of worry and fatigue, was a testament to the sleepless nights and the quiet battles she had fought. She had spent a fortune, enlisted the help of every world-renowned specialist, and endured the polite condolences of doctors who, in the end, had nothing to offer but a prognosis of unending hope. Each doctor's visit was a new defeat, a fresh wound to her already battered heart. One evening, as he sat in his study for the first time in years, looking out at the glittering cityscape he once commanded, he turned to Li Wei, who was preparing a soothing tea. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low and firm, the voice of the man who had once been the Sterling Corporation's ruthless leader. "Don't leave anything out. I need to know why you kept your herbs under lock and key." One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun painted the room in hues of amber and regret, she clutched a silver-framed photograph. It was of her late husband, a man whose wisdom and strength Julian had inherited. "Your grandson is fading," she whispered to the unblinking image. "His fire is gone. What do I do?" Li Wei hesitated for a moment, weighing her words, but she saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire that had once fueled his ambition. He was no longer a patient to be protected. He was a leader who needed the truth to reclaim his throne. She sat down and, with a calm she didn't feel, recounted the entire story. Dr. Chen's initial dismissal, Marcus's insidious plot in the garden, and Mr. Wu's courageous intervention. She showed him the withered, poisonous herbs, now a piece of evidence rather than a threat. A few weeks prior, a name had reached her ears through an old trusted contact. Dr. Li Wei, a female andrologist, a brilliant mind with a radical approach, but an outcast in the conservative medical community. They dismissed her as a quack, a charlatan, a woman whose methods were too unconventional to be legitimate. But for Mrs. Sterling, whose well of hope was running dry, a whisper of a miracle was worth more than a chorus of established failures. She had nothing left to lose but a grandson she was already on the verge of losing. The decision was made in a moment of quiet, desperate resolve. The fate of the Sterling heir, and with it, the fate of the entire empire, was about to be placed in the hands of the one person the world had deemed unworthy. Julian listened without interruption, his face a mask of cold, hard fury. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical ailment. It wasn't just a threat to his life. It was a deliberate, malicious act to steal his legacy. "Marcus," he whispered, the name a cold curse on his lips. "He thought he could poison me and blame it on the woman who saved my life." He clenched his fist, the anger a potent, electrifying force coursing through his veins. The doors of the Sterling suite slid open, and the silence was broken by the sharp, indignant voice of Dr. Chen, the family's head physician. "Mrs. Sterling, this is an unacceptable risk. Julian's condition is delicate. To bring in an uncredentialed, unproven maverick is not just unprofessional, it's dangerous." His face, a study in self-importance, was a mask of furious disapproval as he gestured to the young woman who stood beside him. Li Wei, seeing the storm in his eyes, placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Your health is the most important thing right now. Julian," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Revenge can wait." Dr. Li Wei, dressed in a simple, immaculate white lab coat, was the very picture of quiet professionalism. Her dark hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her expression was one of calm focus. She met Dr. Chen's heated glare with a steady, unflinching gaze. "With all due respect, Doctor," she said, her voice a soft, level tone that somehow cut through his bluster. "What is more dangerous, an unproven method, or a 2-year-long failure?" Julian looked at her, his fury replaced by a steely resolve. "It's not revenge." "Leeway," he said, a grim smile on his face. "It's justice. And it's a debt I intend to collect. The game isn't over. It's just about to begin." Mrs. Sterling, a silent observer of this clash of wills, felt a jolt of admiration. This young woman was not easily intimidated. She motioned for Leeway to enter, ignoring Dr. Chen's sputtering protests. Leeway walked past him and approached Julian's bed. She didn't glance at the mountains of medical files or the gleaming diagnostic machines. Instead, she took a seat by his side, her movements slow and deliberate. She took Julian's hand in hers, her fingers gently finding his pulse. She then began a meticulous, non-invasive examination, her hands moving with an almost artistic precision over his limbs and torso, feeling for subtle changes in temperature, pressure, and muscle tone. The moment had arrived. The Sterling Corporation's board meeting, usually a staid and predictable affair, was buzzing with an undercurrent of nervous energy. Julian, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, walked into the room, his presence as powerful and commanding as it had been before his illness. A gasp rippled through the room. Marcus, who had been confidently holding court at the head of the table, his face a mask of feigned concern, went pale. The ghost had returned, and he was very much alive. Dr. Chen, still fuming, watched from the doorway, a look of utter contempt on his face. "She's a fraud," he muttered, loud enough for Mrs. Sterling to hear. "She's just putting on a show." Mrs. Sterling said nothing. Her weary eyes, however, were fixed on Leeway. She saw not a show, but a deep, profound connection, a healer at work, listening to the silent language of a body that no one else had bothered to understand. The fate of her grandson, she realized, now rested not on technology or reputation, but on the quiet conviction of this young woman's touch. Julian took his seat, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the board members, some relieved, some shocked, and some, like Marcus, frozen in a silent panic. He allowed the silence to stretch, a powerful tool he had always used to his advantage. He then turned to Marcus, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I understand you've been taking good care of the company in my absence. It's time for an audit." Leeway's examination, which had been so quiet and unassuming, felt to Mrs. Sterling like a symphony of silent purpose. For over an hour, the only sound was the faint hum of the machines and the rhythmic, steady exhale of Leeway's breath. She didn't consult any charts or ask for any new tests. She simply felt, her hands moving with an intuition that went beyond the textbook knowledge of her peers. She was a detective of the human body, and she was solving a mystery that had eluded a world of experts. Marcus, a deer caught in the headlights, sputtered a weak protest. "Julian, my dear cousin, this is a miracle. I'm so relieved." The Sterling family's mansion, a sprawling edifice of glass and steel perched atop the city, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Its silence was profound, broken only by the hushed movements of servants and the gentle whir of medical machinery. For 2 years, this was the kingdom of Julian Sterling, a titan of the financial world, a man whose name was synonymous with power and ambition. Now, he was but a ghost within his own walls, his formidable presence reduced to a still form on a pristine hospital bed in his private suite. The mysterious and debilitating andrological condition had not only stolen his health, but had also cast a long, cold shadow over the entire Sterling dynasty. "Save it," Julian interrupted, his voice like a shard of ice. He then looked at Leeway, who was standing quietly by the door, and nodded. Leeway, with a quiet and steady professionalism, walked to the front of the room. She presented a series of documents, meticulously prepared and cross-referenced. She spoke with a calm, irrefutable logic, detailing the near-fatal medical misdiagnoses and presenting the final, damning piece of evidence, the report on the herbs Marcus had swapped, outlining the potent poison they contained. Finally, she stood up, her face a mask of solemn certainty. She turned to Mrs. Sterling, who was now holding her breath, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. "Mrs. Sterling," Li Wei began, her voice calm and firm. "All the doctors you've hired were brilliant. They correctly identified the symptoms as a complex neurological issue, but they made one crucial mistake." The board members looked at Marcus, their faces now a mixture of horror and disgust. Marcus, his facade crumbling, could only shake his head, his denials weak and unconvincing. Julian then stood up, his towering presence filling the room with an undeniable authority. "This is not just a betrayal of a family," he said, his voice ringing with a cold, righteous anger. "It is an attempt on my life and a threat to the future of this company. As of this moment, Marcus Sterling is no longer a part of this family or this corporation. The game, as he liked to call it, is over." Mrs. Sterling leaned forward, her hope a fragile, trembling thing. What mistake! The fallout from the board meeting was swift and absolute. Marcus was stripped of all his titles and shares, and his insidious machinations were exposed to the world. The Sterling Corporation, once shaken to its core by Julian's mysterious illness, was now stronger than ever, fueled by the triumphant return of its formidable leader. The headlines screamed of his miraculous recovery, but Julian's mind was no longer on business or power. His focus, his gratitude, and his heart belonged to one person. They looked at the consequence, not the cause. Li Wei explained, her words a quiet cascade of logic. Julian's neurological issues are not the primary ailment. They are a side effect, a symptom of a deeper, more profound problem. He has a subtle but severe circulatory blockage, a condition so rare it's only been documented in a handful of cases. It's been slowly strangling the vital energy to his body, causing a state of profound torpor. The neurological symptoms are merely the body's attempt to cope with the lack of nourishment. That evening, the Sterling mansion felt like a home again. The silence was no longer heavy, but peaceful. Julian found Li Wei in the private garden, the same garden where Marcus had tried to end his life. She was tending to her herbs, her face serene in the twilight. He approached her, his steps quiet but resolute. The room fell into a stunned silence. This was a completely new perspective, a different path. It was a leap of faith, a rejection of 2 years of established medical opinion. Mrs. Sterling felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. The darkness of the past 2 years was not a dead end. It was just the wrong road. A new road had been found, and it was paved with the quiet conviction of this young woman. Can you cure him?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and newfound hope. "Li Wei," he said, his voice gentle. Li Wei met her gaze, her eyes holding the strength of a promise. "I can," she said, her voice a whisper of conviction. "But my methods are unorthodox, and they require your complete trust, and a great deal of patience." Mrs. Sterling looked at the ghost of her grandson, then back at the determined young woman before her. A decision, born of a mother's love and a grandmother's desperation, was made. The fate of the Sterling family was now in the hands of the very woman the world had labeled a fraud. She turned, a small smile on her face. "Julian, you should be resting." With Mrs. Sterling's unwavering trust secured, Li Wei moved into a guest wing of the sprawling Sterling mansion. She transformed the elegant room into a tranquil clinic, filled with the earthy scents of herbs and the gentle clinking of porcelain mortars and pestles. Her treatment plan was as unconventional as her diagnosis, a slow, meticulous process of cleansing and reawakening. There were no invasive surgeries or powerful drugs. Instead, she used ancient herbal remedies, acupuncture, and gentle therapeutic massages to coax Julian's body back to life. "I've rested for 2 years," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's time to live." He took her hand in his gaze intense. "My grandmother told me a story about a brilliant woman who gave up everything to save a man the world had given up on. She told me this woman was a miracle worker." He paused, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "She was right. You healed my body, but you also saved my family and my company. You brought me back from the brink." Li Wei. While the healing began in a serene corner of the estate, a serpent was coiling in the shadows. Julian's cousin, Marcus Sterling, a man whose ambition was as boundless as his talent was lacking, had been watching the family's slow collapse with a predatory gleam in his eyes. For 2 years, He had been systematically positioning himself as the natural successor, a concerned and dutiful cousin stepping up in a time of crisis. The arrival of Li Wei was a complication he had not anticipated, a threat to his carefully constructed plan. He knelt down on one knee, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring with a single, flawless diamond that seemed to capture the last light of the setting sun. My grandmother believes you are the only one who can truly be my partner, in life and in the sterling legacy. She begs you to marry me, and so do I. Will you marry me? Li Wei. From his opulent office, he watched the sterling stock ticker with a cold, calculating gaze. Every fluctuation was a sign of his growing power, and every hint of Julian's potential recovery was a hammer blow to his ego. He had been paying a maid to keep him informed of Li Wei's activities, fully expecting to hear reports of her failure. But the news he received one morning sent a jolt of icy fear through his heart. Li Wei, the brilliant doctor who had faced down world-renowned specialists and a venomous plotter without a hint of fear, found herself speechless. Her heart, which had been so focused on healing, was now beating a new rhythm, a rhythm of love, hope, and a future she had never dared to dream of. "Sir," the maid whispered over a burner phone, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "His color is better. He moved his hand today. The doctor says he's responding to her treatments." Marcus's face, a mask of aristocratic smugness, twisted into a venomous sneer. He slammed his fist on the desk. This was not a setback. It was a crisis. He had too much to lose. A new plot was hatched, one that was far more sinister than a simple dismissal. He would not just discredit her, he would destroy her, and with her, he would extinguish the last flickering flame of hope for Julian's recovery. The game, he thought with a cold smile, was just beginning, and he had no intention of playing fair. The next day, Marcus put his insidious plan into action. He knew Li Wei often laid her medicinal herbs out to dry in the secluded, sun-drenched private garden behind the guest wing. It was a quiet, peaceful spot, rarely visited by anyone but the gardeners. Marcus had secretly bribed one of the junior gardeners, a young man named Tom, to look the other way. He had then acquired a packet of withered, poisonous herbs that, to an untrained eye, looked remarkably similar to one of Li Wei's crucial ingredients. A tear, warm and bright, escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear of joy, of relief, and of a love she had never expected to find. She nodded, a silent, trembling affirmation. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will." Under the guise of a leisurely stroll, Marcus made his way to the garden. He saw Li Wei's herbs neatly arranged on a bamboo mat, a vibrant mosaic of green, purple, and red. With a swift, practiced motion, he knelt down and, with a cold, cruel smile playing on his lips, swapped a pile of fresh, life-giving herbs with the dried, toxic ones he carried. He was about to set a trap that would not only discredit Li Wei, but also fatally harm Julian. He envisioned the headlines, the scandal, the absolute certainty of his ascendance to power. He was about to become the savior of the Sterling Company, having exposed the fraud who had almost killed the heir. A wave of profound relief and unbridled joy washed over Julian's face. He slid the ring onto her finger. Its cold, hard metal, a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. The diamond caught the light, a brilliant promise of a shared future. He stood up and, with a gentleness that was reserved only for her, pulled her into a tender embrace. The Sterling family, once shadowed by a crippling illness and a serpent in their midst, was now a family of love, healing, and hope. But he was being watched. The news of their engagement spread like wildfire, a fairy tale ending to a saga that had begun in tragedy. Mrs. Sterling, whose dream had been fulfilled, was the happiest woman in the world. She saw in Li Wei not just a daughter-in-law, but the true cornerstone of the family, the one whose brilliance had restored their legacy, and Julian, the man who had lost 2 years to the darkness, had found his light in a place he never would have looked in the hands of a quiet, brilliant doctor who had dared to believe in a cure when no one else would. Together, they would build a new legacy, one not just of power and wealth, but of love, compassion, and the enduring miracle of healing. Old Mr. Wu, the head butler, and a man who had served the Sterling family for over 40 years was tending to his prized rose bushes nearby. His eyes, though old, were sharp, and his loyalty was a thing of legend. He had always harbored a deep distrust of Marcus, whom he saw as a man of shallow ambition and no integrity. He had a sixth sense for deceit, and the sight of Marcus, a man who loathed gardening, kneeling among the herbs sent a jolt of alarm through him. He saw the swift and secretive exchange, and his heart sank. He didn't know what Marcus had done, but he knew it was nothing good. He waited until Marcus had left, then carefully collected the herbs and took them to Li Wei. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had chosen his side in this silent war, and he had just provided the first, crucial piece of evidence. The wedding was a spectacle of understated elegance, a private affair held in the same garden where their love had blossomed amidst the quiet conspiracy. Li Wei, radiant in a simple yet exquisite gown, stood beside Julian, the man who was now not just her patient, but her husband, old Mrs. Sterling, her face beaming with a happiness she hadn't felt in years, watched them with a look of profound satisfaction. She had not only secured the future of her grandson, but had also found the perfect partner to stand by his side. Mr. Wu, his face a mask of solemn determination, found Li Wei in her clinic, carefully grinding a fragrant mixture of leaves and bark. He held out the small bundle of herbs he had collected from the garden, his hands trembling slightly. "Doctor," he said, his voice a low rumble of concern. "I saw Master Marcus near these. He was acting strangely. I've served this family for a long time, and my heart tells me he meant to do harm." The world watched with bated breath as the new power couple of the Sterling Empire began their reign. Li Wei did not abandon her passion for healing. She used Julian's vast resources to establish a foundation dedicated to researching and promoting traditional medicine and unconventional healing practices. She became a beacon of hope for countless people who, like Julian, had been failed by conventional medicine. Li Wei's eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately went to the herbs. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, and she could tell at a glance that the fresh, life-giving herbs she had harvested had been replaced. She carefully took the new herbs from him, her fingers brushing the brittle, faded leaves. Her heart pounded in her chest as she recognized the poisonous counterpart, a subtle but potent toxin that could reverse all of Julian's progress and plunge him into a fatal coma. This was not just a plot to discredit her, it was an attempt on Julian's life. The serene art of healing had just become a battlefield. Julian, with his mind sharpened and his perspective broadened by his near-death experience, led the Sterling Corporation into a new era. The company's focus shifted from pure profit to sustainable growth and ethical practices. The ruthless titan of finance was now a compassionate and visionary leader, his decisions guided not just by logic, but by the love and empathy he had learned from his wife. A cold, hard resolve settled over her. The quiet, unassuming healer was now a strategist, a protector. She looked at Mr. Wu, her face a mask of solemn gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Wu," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You may have just saved Julian's life, and for that, I am forever in your debt." Together, they were a force of nature. Julian, the powerful protector, and Li Wei, the gentle healer. They were a testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet, undeniable strength of a woman who had, against all odds, saved a king and became a queen in her own right. Their legacy was no longer just the Sterling name, but a new chapter in the history of hope. Mr. Wu nodded, a flicker of relief in his tired eyes. He had done his part. The burden now rested on her. Li Wei, however, was not one to be daunted. She moved all her herbal preparations to a locked room and began to watch every person who entered the estate with a newfound suspicion. She now knew her adversary's true nature, and she knew she had to expose him, not just for Julian's sake, but for the future of the Sterling Empire. The silent war had begun, and she was ready for the fight. Months turned into a year, and the Sterling family thrived under the new leadership of Julian and Li Wei. The love between them was a steady, quiet force that permeated every corner of the mansion, transforming its sterile grandeur into a warm, inviting home. Old Mrs. Sterling, whose health had been failing due to the stress of Julian's illness, now bustled with a renewed vigor. her days filled with the joy of a happy family. The question hung in the air, a breathtaking moment of silence between two people whose lives had been irrevocably intertwined by fate. Li Wei looked from the glittering diamond to Julian's sincere, hopeful face. She saw not the powerful CEO of a global empire, but the man whose life she had painstakingly, lovingly, pieced back together. She saw the vulnerability beneath his strength, the gratitude beneath his gaze, and the profound love in his eyes. This was not a business arrangement, but a genuine plea from the heart. One crisp autumn morning, Julian found Li Wei in the garden, a small smile playing on her lips as she tended to her herbs. She looked up as he approached, her eyes twinkling with a secret joy. He knelt beside her, his hand gently finding hers. "What is it?" he asked, his voice soft with concern and curiosity. One morning, as the sun streamed through the window and painted a warm stripe across the pristine white sheets, something extraordinary happened. Li Wei was adjusting an acupuncture needle in Julian's wrist when she saw a subtle, almost imperceptible twitch of his fingers. Her heart leaped into her throat. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on his hand. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he moved his thumb. "Julian," she began, her voice a gentle whisper, "our family, it's about to get a little bigger." Mrs. Sterling, who had been sitting quietly in a chair in the corner, saw it too. A choked sob escaped her lips as she rushed to the bedside. Her frail hand gently touched his, her tear-filled eyes wide with a miracle she had almost given up on. "Julian," she whispered, her voice a fragile symphony of joy and disbelief. Julian's heart skipped a beat. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face for confirmation. A wave of profound, overwhelming emotion washed over him. The man who had once been a ghost, a titan reduced to a fading memory, was now about to become a father. The joy in his heart was so immense, so all-consuming, that he found himself speechless. He pulled her into a fierce, tender embrace, his face buried in her hair, a silent testament to his love and gratitude. Then, a moment later, Julian's eyelids fluttered. They slowly opened, revealing eyes that, for 2 long years, had been a vacant abyss. They were still foggy, disoriented, but they were no longer empty. As his gaze drifted across the room, it landed on Li Wei. He didn't know her name or her story, but in the chaos of his reawakening mind, he recognized her touch, the scent of her herbs, and the gentle, persistent presence that had been his lifeline. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of his savior, Marcus, who had been lingering in the doorway. A ghost of a smile still on his face from his last conversation with the maid, saw the scene unfold. The sight of Julian's conscious eyes sent a shockwave of cold, hard fear through him. His carefully laid plans were now not just a distant dream, but a waking nightmare. Old Mrs. Sterling, who had been watching from the balcony, saw the scene unfold. A single, happy tear rolled down her cheek. The family, once broken and shrouded in darkness, was now complete. The legacy of the Sterling name was no longer just about business and power, but about the beautiful, enduring miracle of life itself. A new chapter was beginning, and with it, a new generation of hope. The glimmer of consciousness in Julian's eyes soon became a steady, burning light. With Li Wei's guidance and careful nourishment, Julian's recovery accelerated at a breathtaking pace. The man who had been a ghost in his own home was now a student of his own body, learning to flex muscles he hadn't used in years. His mind, once a foggy expanse, sharpened, and with it, his memory returned in a slow, painful flood. 9 months later, the Sterling mansion was filled with a new kind of sound, the soft, cooing cry of a newborn baby. A son, a healthy, beautiful baby boy, who carried the weight of a legacy on his tiny shoulders. They named him Leo, a name that signified strength and courage, a testament to the long, arduous journey they had taken to get to this moment. One afternoon, Li Wei was helping him with a series of gentle stretching exercises when he stopped, his gaze intense. "My grandmother, she was the one who found you," he asked, his voice still a little weak but clear. Li Wei, her face a picture of serene exhaustion and boundless love, held her son close. Julian sat beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, his gaze fixed on the tiny miracle in her arms. In that moment, the world of board meetings, stock tickers, and treacherous cousins faded into a distant memory. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of his wife's hand and the soft, rhythmic breathing of his son. He had it all: health, love, and a family he had once feared he would never have. Liwi nodded, a small, proud smile on her face. She never gave up on you, not for a moment. She fought for you when no one else would. Old Mrs. Sterling, now a great-grandmother, was the picture of pure bliss. She spent her days doting on Leo, her wise eyes seeing in his tiny face not just the future of the Sterling dynasty, but a symbol of hope and new beginnings. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that the Sterling legacy was in safe hands. It was a legacy built not just on wealth and power, but on the quiet, unwavering strength of a woman who had dared to heal, to love, and to build a family from the ashes of tragedy. Julian looked at her, his eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it was almost tangible. He looked at the gentle curve of her brow, the way she spoke with quiet authority, the way her presence filled the room with a sense of calm and purpose, the memory of her touch, of the smell of her herbs, and of that first flicker of recognition in his mind became a solid foundation for a new feeling, a deep, protective, and overwhelming sense of admiration. She was not just his doctor, she was his second chance. The story of the CEO who was saved by a female andrologist and the grandmother who begged her to marry her grandson was no longer just a headline. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of love, the enduring strength of family, and the beautiful, miraculous new beginning that was born from the darkest of times. He began to ask about the long, dark years he had lost. Li Wei, with her characteristic honesty, told him everything: the doctor's misdiagnoses, his grandmother's desperation, and the quiet, loyal support of Mr. Wu. She omitted nothing, but she also did not mention the sinister plot of his cousin. The time for that, she knew, would come later. For now, she wanted him to focus on his healing, on the new life that was waiting for him. But Julian, the brilliant CEO, could read between the lines. He saw the shadows in her eyes when she spoke of the difficulties, and he knew a deeper struggle had been waged in his name. His mind, once a powerful tool for business, now turned to the intricacies of personal justice. He was not just recovering his health, he was recovering his kingdom,